Afrotech? That mass exodus at the door, you might want to sit down. This is going to be a good one. So I have with me today Karim Webb and Jason White, who are going to give you all how to exactly crack the code on cannabis and black economics. So you might want to sit here and be present, Afrotech. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Ooh, all right. And maybe everybody has the itis this fine Friday afternoon. So let's just jump right in. I want for you all to just give the audience a sense of how you ended up in the cannabis space. For both of you, that was certainly not your path. So just really helping this audience understand why cannabis for you and why now.
Well, for me, I've been in the restaurant space, for the majority of my life. I'm a Buffalo Wild Wings franchisee in LA, and engaged. I own the Buffalo Wild Wings in Crenshaw District, South LA, and we, thank you for those of y'all who came, bought some wings and hung out, supported our ability to engage community in an authentic way, right? So being on boards and really recognizing as an entry-level employer, we have a role to play with respect to our own opportunity youth. And then there being now set-aside licenses in the space called social equity programs that are definitely set up in LA and engaging in that process and now throughout the country and figuring out how we can make certain that as African Americans who have suffered 75% of the criminal justice or the ramifications of the criminal justice, that we get our fair share of the pie from an ownership and resources perspective.
And Jason, what about you?
Very different story. I was in consumer marketing that took me all the way to Shanghai when I was working on White and Kennedy on the Nike account. I came back, worked at Beats by Dre for 5 years, ended up as the global head of marketing at Beats, and then really moved into the cannabis space because it felt like a space that there was, one, as a marketer, there was real wide open space to do something creative, but I also saw the first time where I could bring kind of a purpose-driven initiative and a business-driven initiative together. And when you see what's happened in the space and how organically the community and cannabis are connected, to come to a very different situation. So I came into the largest, really, consumer brand in America, in Select, and what they were looking for was someone that wanted to help take it from an incredible product and an incredible business to also a brand. And what we all agreed to was if we're gonna do that, then we have to do it with the responsibility and accountability towards communities and figure that out. We just launched a 501c3 called Possible Plan, and that's kind of how we're doing that.
And I think so often when we talk to black audiences or when people talk to black audiences, it's from a consumer standpoint, right? We're always hearing about our $1.3 trillion in buying power, but very rarely are we talking about the potential for ownership. And so when you talk about responsibility and accountability to the community, what we know now is that 11 states in the District of Columbia have legalized recreational use for cannabis, and we know that there are 34 states that have legalized marijuana from the medical standpoint. When you talk about responsibility and accountability to the community, I think in this industry specifically, you have to talk about it from the standpoint of what opportunities exist for us. Karim, I know that you're doing a lot of work with Fourth Movement in this space. If you can, for a moment, talk about what Fourth Movement does and why that's important. And the third part of that is, where do they get in where they fit in?
Yeah. I think anything that we do in any other area of our life or what we're being prepared to do, there's an opportunity in and around cannabis, ownership or not. But I don't want to downplay ownership. Ownership is incredibly important because when you own, you get to determine who works there. You get all the advantages of ownership from a tax perspective, et cetera. And it is, in America, what unlocks wealth and intergenerational wealth. Cannabis specifically is a unique opportunity because there are set-aside licenses. Thankfully, we have primarily progressive legislators around the country who are keenly aware of the disproportionate impact of criminal justice around cannabis and how that's affected black and brown people. And so now, what we have around the country are publicly traded companies or publicly traded out of Canada, all white, who have taken the majority of the medical licenses around the country, but progressive legislators in California, in New York, in New Jersey, in Illinois, and Maryland, all other states are saying, wait a minute, we're going to make certain that we set aside licenses for people that come from communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. So that presents an opportunity for us, whether you're in the cultivation space or whether you want to manufacture, you want to distribute, you want to be involved in delivery, which lends itself to technology, as does retail, right? We have a very robust technical platform. What we do is we don't make people wrong. We say we're going to go out, we're going to raise the capital, we're going to 100% finance people to be able to open up some of the most competitive retail that exists in this space. We think the most competitive retail. Then we help with the HR, the accounting, all the things that are sometimes prohibitors of us really competing at the highest level.
And Jason, you'd mentioned that you started a nonprofit in this space as well. Can you tell me the name of it one more time?
Possible Plan.
Possible Planning. What are the main what is the main mission for Possible Plan, and how do you ensure that the community that has been most adversely impacted by the war on drugs via cannabis, how this organization is working to combat some of those challenges?
Our mission is quite simply to change the narrative around cannabis, because I think you see what has happened historically and also how that affects even folks like y'all who are hesitant to get into the business and hesitant to take part in what is going to be the second greatest creation of wealth in our lifetime after tech. And so Possible Plan really has kind of two narratives to it. One is how do we look at reparatory justice, and then the other is how do we look at equitable access. So in the reparatory justice side, that's really looking at incarceration and expungement, and how do we take the input, the footprint and the impact that we can have as a very, very large brand. How do we kind of start to make some change there? And on the equitable access side, which is going to be kind of a step 2 for us, how do we make sure people get an opportunity to participate? And I think if you look at what we're doing, they're very different and come from very different spaces. And I think that's what's important about cannabis right now is there's more than one way for us to change this industry, but we have to come through every door. And that's what, Karim and Al Harrington and other folks we're all trying to do.
And to that point, you just mentioned equitable access. Karim, you talked about the licensing process. We know that Oakland was one of the first areas to have recreational marijuana, but they also were the first to issue a social equity component in their licensing process. Can you talk about what some of the flaws might be? No, we're not trying to shade Oakland, but we want to make sure that where people are looking to follow models, right, they can also make sure that they avoid the same mistakes.
I think cultural competency matters, right? And so are shared interests. So you can have a company that says, listen, I want to finance individuals who have the ability to get licensed. So in these set-aside programs, folks oftentimes, can qualify for programming but don't have the capital to be able to stand up competitive businesses. So where do you go get the capital? Other cannabis companies who otherwise wouldn't be able to expand their footprint partner with people who qualify for social equity. Well, those companies are stood up just to be profitable and be as big as they can be in cannabis. Their purpose is not making sure black people live equitably in America. So in that way, we kind of have a divergence of why, if you would. For Fourth Movement, and I think other companies, and there's space for other people to be in this space to provide solutions to a tremendous opportunity. Again, this is currently a $10 billion industry, but it will be a $200 billion industry plus in 10 years. And that'll happen very quickly, if not more, depending upon how rapidly states adopt and when we get federal legalization, which will happen. The question is, how big of the pie are we going to have? If we end up with 1% of a $200 billion pie, shame on us. We ought to be having these conversations, and talented people like the folks in this room ought to be thinking about how do I get in where I fit in and make sure that I'm set up and my network is set up to compete, to do business at the highest level.
And Jason and Karim, Karim, you just brought up a strong political component. I think legislation is a key part of this, and action taken by legislators on the state, local, and federal levels is super important for the long-term viability of cannabis. One of the things we know is H.R. 1595, which is the Safe Banking Act, just passed the House of Representatives, which would allow for cannabis companies, legal cannabis companies, to receive financial services. It has not yet passed the Senate. When you think about the other barriers of entry because there is not policy, right, that would allow this space to exist for us in a way that I think it makes it, one, makes it sustainable, and two, makes people engage, whether we're talking about raising capital. We know there are folks that won't fund these ventures because it's not federally legal. What are the other barriers of entry that exist from a political standpoint?
Well, I think, to your point about capital, even when you can raise capital, the cost of that capital is extraordinarily high. You're talking 20% and higher. So that's an issue. It's still a Schedule I drug, which means there's basically no way to research it, no way to kind of put it on the docket as a political discussion. And in addition to that, I think if you look at, for example, the MORE Act, which is the most aggressive bill out there, that's when you get to real, true expungement, putting money aside for research, and looking at even surveys and opportunities to truly get a measurement of like what is the state of the industry in the communities, what are the real numbers behind this, and without that legislation, none of that exists. This is just companies making money. And you need that governance to make sure that some of those other steps are taken around this industry.
Well, you want to answer that, Karim, as well?
I mean, we're black. You know, in every way that's ever existed in this country as the descendants of slaves, you know, we have been disproportionately, left. It's harder for us. It's just the reality of the situation. And the cannabis business is harder because it's federally illegal, regardless of what states do. An example of that would be like no matter what your business is, you need a place to operate your business. If you go out to go lease a place and the owner of that property has an FDIC loan, if they went to Wells Fargo and took out a mortgage on that place, then they can't lease to you. So now you got to deal with real estate that's either wholly owned or is financed in some creative way that's typically more expensive. So then that limits the amount of real estate. So then landlords have the ability to be more selective. So if you are undercapitalized, maybe you have had an issue or two with your credit. Maybe you've got some criminal justice related activity in your past. You're probably going to have a tough time getting access to a place to even do business, let alone where the banking relationships come from. You can't deal with an FDIC bank. So there are all different types of ways that we've already been redlined in business in general. You go into all of us here who have businesses and work in companies know what it feels like to be in a boardroom where you're the onlyest one, where you kind of, code switching.
Karim, that's country as hell. You said
well,
onlyest. My grandmother said onlyest. I'm sorry.
I'm from LA. We all originally came from the country anyway. So.
Definitely country with that. I'm sorry, y'all. I got sidetracked. I don't know what the hell he said. He said onlyest, and I lost it. What'd you say?
But even to add one thing on top of
to tack on the onlyest. Jason, go ahead.
Is also taxes. I mean, even in Oakland, like you're talking about a 10% tax. So there's your margin gone. So it's every step of the process has something to make it very preventative, unless you have a lot of money behind you, unless you're backed by a lot of money. We see average cost just for a dispensary is $300,000. To do totally vertical is $2.5 million. Those are the figures reported this year to start these businesses. So it's just incredibly preventative.
But I don't want to be too morbid. I think that what's interesting and the opportunity is where the blue ocean is, or the water, right? That's where you can disrupt and create an outsized opportunity and execute against it. We got the smartest people of color in the country in this room right here today. It's to figure out. It's to figure out how do we come together to create some of these solutions. The barriers exist, but there are willing policymakers who aren't business people. The policymakers are interested in criminal justice, and they can legislate around that. They can legislate around the opportunity and the licenses. They can't stand up a business. They can't address who you are and what your character is, your ability to create a team around yourself that can then go compete in the marketplace. We got to do that, but we know how to do that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here, right? So the idea and the opportunity is, what do you do well? Who are the people around us? And how can we look at this opportunity and figure out ways to get in and win and own. Yeah.
Black people are the greatest disruptors in history. And this is now the greatest of the greatest who know tech. And cannabis is an industry that lags so far behind in technology that there are so many avenues in, whether it's how you revolutionize a POS system, to how you do apps for delivery, to how brands are building their own expression on apps, to how you track seed to sale. All of that technology is in its infancy in our category. And for me, it was so important to be here because it was like what you said, Karim. Like, y'all are the folks that are going to do it if somebody's going to do it.
Yeah. And I think to that point, you all are talking about, the art of the possible and the blue ocean. What's in the ocean? Tell us some of the fish. Like, we want to go get the money, Karim. Like, what's in the ocean?
You talking about country? I don't know what the hell you talking about.
You brought it up. You're like, we need to talk about the blue ocean. Okay.
Yeah.
So then what are some of the opportunities that exist? This panel is about Black economic possibility in cannabis. What are some of the opportunities? We can talk about the barriers all day. We know that access to capital is a challenge. The reason you stood up Fourth Movement, the reason you're working on the nonprofit you have, we know that equitable access has not been created for us, even with a social equity clause in Proposition 64.
Yeah.
What did Proposition 64 get right? Where are the holes, and where can they plug them?
Well, the time is now, right? So in LA, they're in the middle of a social equity process. In San Francisco, in Oakland, in Fresno, things are rebooting. All around the country, wherever folks in this room come from, I promise you the conversation is being had. It's a robust conversation. So it's forward-looking. It's not in the rearview mirror. There's no more opportunity. There's only been a little bit of the opportunity that's been distributed. And there is a good portion of it that is going to be set aside for us. So there are entrenched interests who, again, they're publicly traded. Therefore, they got to continue to grow. And their interests, if they have to work with us, they will work with us because we're going to get a lot of the licenses. But they want to leverage us in order to continue to make certain that their market share, or wherever, where they sit, is consistent with their investors' expectations. We got to make sure that we are working with our legislators and jurisdictions to get the opportunity, to obtain the opportunity, get the license, and that we are, again, figuring out how do we leverage that license to stand up business, to control the resources. This is, like Jason said, like very few times where there is a market that is, like anybody could go next to me and open another wing spot. There's not going to be somebody that comes next to a 64 and Hope, which is the name of our retail concept brand, right across the street. There's a limited number of licenses, and once they're given out, that's it. So because we are going to get a disproportionate amount of the licenses, we can get a disproportionate amount of the wealth. And this is, if you think about the alcohol industry or other industries at their infancy, or like let's just say tech, right? And think about what if we had a disproportionate amount of the access, what would we do with it? We could really address income inequality in our country. And this is not reparations for us, but it could be a form of reparations for the war on drugs. And it will not happen if we don't make it happen. But if not us, who? And if not now, it will not happen. Yeah.
Jason, one thing Karim just mentioned about set aside for us. Is our only hope in the cannabis industry whatever is set aside through regulation, through city ordinance, through the legislative process? Is that our only viable pathway to success in cannabis?
No, and I'm glad you asked that question because I know that we're here to talk about ownership. We're here to talk about all of those ways to kind of really change the paradigm. But I mean, I don't own. I'm a CMO in one of the largest companies in the country. Like we have 600.
Shares?
We have six. I do.
Okay, you own.
But we have 600 employees, right? You have these multi-state operators that have 1,200 employees. This is an economy that's going to happen. And what I've found is, because look, I had to tell my father and my mother last year, Thanksgiving Day, I was leaving Apple to go into cannabis, okay? My dad thought I had lost my mind. And those are the conversations that we have to have, and those are the opportunities that are out there. It's not just I own or I don't get in, right? There's a lot of opportunities to get in. I think to think that things have to be set aside is crazy. One, because I mean, you look at what Al Harrington did. Yeah, he had the capital to get started, but what he's done with Viola is dope. He's in 4 states now. He's very authentic. Like, you know, he what he does is because it's what he feels like he does and what he feels like his brand is about. It was started because of his grandmother, and it's got just a natural, true story. But at the beginning of that is capital, right? So yes, I think capital is a major, major issue, but there are a lot of ways into this space that don't require you to start a dispensary or start a grow through technology, also through employment in these companies that are becoming the biggest companies with all of the capital. When everybody else's numbers are going down, these companies are all growing and raising tons and tons of money. So don't just stop at ownership.
So one of the spaces we haven't touched on that much today so far is the technology piece. When you drive through or down the streets of LA, you see apps. There are delivery apps for cannabis. There are different platforms that exist that help access to cannabis. But what are the other technological opportunities that exist for the black techies in the room at Afrotech?
I mean, like I said before, seed to sale is going to be very, very important because more states are taking on different systems where you have to track exactly where that plant is from the time it is a plant to the time it goes on shelf. So there's a lot of room in there. I think, as we just saw from some of the health crisis and the vaping crisis, which was not a vaping crisis, but that was, you know, product authenticity, making sure you know something's from the legacy market or something is from the authenticated market, right? I think, again, like I said, every brand is now trying to figure out an app, and what we're seeing now is people are really trying to track your use of your product, especially in the vape space, to how you smoke, what were the cannabinoids involved, like, you know, what specifically was your intake milligram-wise. So there's a lot of science around getting very, very, very customized and understanding what you are consuming. So there's a ton of ways into this space, and I'm sure from an operational side, there's even more.
I mean, listen, people have leveraged our creative genius all around the world, whether it be music, television, film, whatever. We never really have gotten our fair piece of the pie based upon what we've contributed to culture. This is an opportunity to leverage our technological expertise and marry that with culture, you know, in order to create what's disruptive in the space. To Jason's point, you know, you've got a few distribution channels because there's so much rigor around the legal market and licensing and how you have to check for people's age and the testing and all of that. Yeah, that's great, but there's an infinite amount of different types of products that we're going to see in the space. People are going to use cannabis in ways that we're not even talking about today. There's all kinds of new IP coming to the marketplace and different ways that we're going to be able to talk about it, brands to stand up, and then unique ways to leverage, find out what people want exactly when they want it and how to get it to them. And we can leverage our creative genius like we have around culture creation and fashion and music and film in this space and then own it. Yeah.
Karim, you talk often about the fact that in this particular industry, we own less than 1% of the businesses. And I know it's not just about ownership, Jason, but I think part of this has to be addressed in terms of equitable access and what is available, again, to the folks in this room who are potential owners, who are certainly innovators. When you talk about or think about the fact that it's just 1% of, and this is not the only industry where we own 1% or less, what are some of the things that they can do and that you are doing right now to ensure that that story does not continue to be the story, the 1%?
I mean, for us, we are trying to own as much of the narrative as possible. So, for instance, we capture everything that we do. We own our own IP. We'll partner with Netflix and others in order to tell the story about fairness and how we're doing what it is that we're doing. Same thing on the supply chain side. Like any other business we're involved in, how can we extend the opportunity to people who share our why and are culturally competent with us? So where are the black farmers? Where are the black folks, you know, that are involved from a concentrate or edible or technology or real estate or construction or PR or all of the different ways that we're spending money based upon the capital raised in order to make this thing happen. Awareness. What's happening in the state that you live, in the city that you live, and who are the players? It's really not that hard to figure out, I promise you. If we take a determinative approach around finding out, you will. There's a lot of chatter around cannabis. It doesn't take, a great deal to find out how you can get engaged, where you live, and you don't have to change what you're doing, maybe just add to.
Jason, what about you?
I think there's kind of a series of steps to achieve that. I think first, you have to look at all the way on sort of the 501c3 side of things. You have expungement and you have social equity programs. So I think what you have to see is we have to demand that of the next states that come, that legalize and go adult use, because the more you do that, you're already taking away barriers that are gonna prevent a lot of people from getting in, right? I think that's step one. Step two is, what Karim does is very kind of from the ground up grassroots, really giving people the training and the know-how, and then he spends a year developing these people, right? And I think that's step two, is like giving people the tools and the equipment to be successful. And then I think step three is when you look at companies that are like our size. My challenge, and I'm working on something that I wish I could talk about right now, but I can't.
Talk about it. Breaking news.
It's as we scale, right? And as we go from 4 states to 10 states to 19, how do you bring other brands and other companies with you? Because you are essentially sitting in the seat of being a kingmaker, right? You can decide who's going to do supply for us for 19 states, for 10 states, whatever. So I think by putting the right people in charge of some of those decisions, i.e. people like me, where it's like, I come from a background of understanding communities and trying to make sure we're thinking about this the right way, not purely just profit. You're going to have people who make decisions about who that supplier should be, who the partner should be, from everything to packaging to, what product sits on shelves and what are you selling to consumers. So I think it's a whole entire value chain that you have to get right, and there's a lot of ways to kind of create that.
Since, as we heard earlier, my good brother Charlemagne said, this is basically Wakanda. He said you land. I don't know if y'all were in here for that. It's crazy. Did he come back? But okay. The thing that I would love for you all to do is, as kingmakers, right, sitting on this stage where we can provide technical assistance and real know-how to people that would want to work with you. What is the pathway to ensure that their technology can be the technology you use? What is the pathway to ensure that they become the next supplier for an innovative project that they want on your shelves? What does that pathway look like? As a potential supplier for 64 and Hope, as a potential supplier, what do they need to do? Give me 3 steps. Give me 4 steps. They got real quiet.
No, I love that. I love that. I think one, there's folks like Mary Pryor who are out in the world collecting literally building a network of the black executives in this business. So make sure you are in touch with her, and make sure you're on that list, and make sure your name is there as someone who's a person of color who wants to engage in this community and has a skill set to offer it, right?
Where is Mary Pryor?
Mary
Pardon my ignorance.
She physically is in New York, and Detroit, and LA.
Does she work with you?
Mary Pryor is on the board of Possible Plan.
Got it. Mary Pryor, y'all. Next. Give me 2.
You can email me, Karim@fortbeat.com. I'll send it to, whomever on my team is the appropriate person. So we have folks that handle the tech stack, and COO who handles,
Did you all get that email?
Kind of stuff. Yeah.
They need you to say it clearly, Karim. They didn't hear you.
DM me at Karim Webb, and we will get it where it's
at the
going.
onlyest one.
Yeah.
Look, at Select,
Got me.
At Select, our SVP of supply chain is black. He's the guy that grew up in the game, in the legacy market, and is now in the.
What is the legacy market? So, did y'all catch that, in the legacy market? What is that?
He was
been
out
around the block.
He was out there doing his thing, and
all right. Well, he's in social equity now.
He's been with the
executive.
company since the beginning. That's Griff Jones. Hit Griff Jones. Let him know what you're about. He's in our video. We have folks throughout our company that are engaged and looking for these types of folks and these types of partners.
Amazing. Well, we have 15 seconds left. Do you all have any onlyest parting words?
I want to shout out Morgan and Afrotech and Ron and the Reed team.
Morgan! There's Morgan. Morgan
All the dope merch and the equity T-shirt that I saw across the street that I'm definitely going to be rocking at the next thing. And thank all you guys for being here today and being interested in this subject.
Thank you, Jason.
Get in the business, because it's going to be bigger than you can possibly imagine. Get in now.
All right. Thank you all so much. Happy Friday. Happy Afrotech. Have fun.